Hello, and welcome to Catholicism in the Car. My name is Parker Zerbal. Alrighty, I want to continue discussing social issues. I'm actually not even sure what number episode this would be within this sort of a little series here on social issues. Last time we were discussing euthanasia, and we got to kind of the root of it, that really when people are talking about the morality of euthanasia, I argue they're talking about the morality of suicide. And I think this is a very interesting topic. You know, if you are looking at it from a detached way. Now, I have to say, I've never had anyone close to me take their own life, so I'm not going to treat this subject with the solemnity that someone might who has had that sort of an experience. And I want to give, first of all, my condolences to anyone who has had someone close to them die via suicide. It is a very serious issue, particularly in our culture. Suicide is certainly on the rise, and I want to make a general plea for people that, you know, if you're listening to this and you are having those sorts of thoughts, please reach out to someone, and explain to them, if you can, why you're thinking this way. Anyway, I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a counselor, but of course I can have sympathy for these kinds of situations. Now, I'm going to be discussing this mainly on a philosophical and thence an ethical level about this issue of suicide. Now, it seems quite clear that throughout human history, suicide has been viewed as morally wrong. And I would argue there are a few reasons for this. The first one is that suicide is ultimately a selfish decision. It's an easy out from suffering for the individual, for the self, but it creates an absolutely immense amount of suffering for all the people that person was close to, or who loved that person in any way. And then, from a theological standpoint, the taking of one's own life, the reason that would be morally wrong from a Christian or a religious perspective is because God is the author of life. He gives and He takes it away. No one else has the right to take away life except God. And certain situations where, under certain circumstances, human beings can have that right in their own time and in their own place. Mainly thinking here about the death penalty, and I think we've discussed that a bit in the past. We've discussed the death penalty. If not, I'll make sure to make a video, or not a video, but an podcast episode on that, because Pope Francis has come out, in the last number of years and said that the death penalty is inadmissible. He hasn't said that it's intrinsically evil, because that would really be a contradiction in church teaching for Pope Francis to come out and say that the death penalty would be intrinsically evil. Anyway, I don't want to go down that rabbit hole, but I think it's just an important caveat to make when we're talking about this sort of discussion of God having authority over life and death, and why only the proper authority, I would argue, can take a life. Okay? In war, the proper authority is a soldier, in war, against another soldier, not against anyone else, but only against another soldier who is fighting on the opposite side from said soldier. Anyway, so, yeah, I think one of the main reasons for suicide being considered immoral throughout human history has been that it's ultimately a selfish act that may end the suffering for the person committing the act, but increases an immense, it produces an immense amount of suffering for other people who were touched by the subject's life, basically. So, yeah, I do think that, it's clear that from a natural point of view, I think it's a fairly easy and accepted premise conclusion, that suicide is immoral. In the United States, as far as I know, suicide is technically still illegal. Now, that's one of those laws where it's like, well, what's the point of making it illegal? I mean, you can't punish the person because they're dead. So what's the point? But I think it's more about society through that law, taking a moral stance against a certain issue. That would be the point of making such a law. If a society didn't make such a law, it could be assumed by the members of that society that the society deems such an act as permissible. So if suicide was not illegal in a certain area, the people in that area might eventually start assuming that it's permissible. Anyway, yeah, I guess I'm kind of taking a utilitarian position here. If you're looking at it just purely from like a natural point of view, it would be taking a utilitarian position that yes, you might be ending your own suffering, but you're creating an immense amount of suffering for those around you, for the person who is committing this sort of an act. And, I'm not one to usually make utilitarian arguments, but I've made a theological argument for it, but that's not going to be acceptable to a lot of people. A utilitarian argument might be more acceptable to those who are not religious. And I think that's where a lot of people come at this when they say, that suicide is immoral, and if they're not taking a religious position for that. So, yeah, I think that pretty much goes over the topic of suicide. And it would follow from this that if suicide is an ultimately selfish act, it would conclude, therefore, despite all the confusion around the issue of euthanasia, the cloud of confusion that can come, because euthanasia from a utilitarian standpoint, which this is interesting, that euthanasia from a utilitarian standpoint, it can be argued as being a good moral thing from the point of utilitarianism, which I think is why our culture is going down this road of saying that that euthanasia is fine, because this may be where they kind of make a distinction between suicide and euthanasia. It's not in the act itself, because the act itself is the same and the intent is the same. The difference is the amount of suffering caused to other people around you. So is something moral or immoral depending on the amount of suffering it causes other people around you? That's a very interesting question. Maybe we should examine that next time, the issue of utilitarianism. I'm not quite sure if I'm totally equipped to do that yet. I haven't delved very deeply into that topic, but I might offer some brief reflections on it. So I think we'll do that. We'll talk about utilitarianism next time a little bit, and how it relates to these issues of life and death, and probably social issues in general. And then we'll move on to our next topic on social issues. And I haven't really decided what that will be yet. We've discussed the issues of life and death, abortion, euthanasia. We've also discussed the conception. I've also given arguments in the past against contraception, so you can go look those up. Let's see. I'm trying to think about what would be the next most logical issue to take, because I think we're now getting out of the more black and white issues, at least according to the Catholic Church, where the Catholic Church takes a very firm stance on things like abortion and euthanasia. But other issues such as, immigration, gun control, things like that, the church doesn't really take a very black and white stance. It's more of a gray scale. So, next time I think we'll probably discuss the issue of immigration, I think, because it relates to, it can relate to these issues of life and death, or at least it relates to them more than gun rights do, I think, at least at face value. I don't know, you might disagree with me on that decision, but I think next time we'll talk about immigration. All right, thanks. Oh, real quick, please feel free to subscribe to any of my podcasts on any of the podcast players. Find me on YouTube. Please subscribe. Like me on Facebook, like the Catholicism Car channel on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. We're all there, Catholicism Car. And then I also have a Patreon account if you wish to support what I do at this podcast and this YouTube channel. And you can also support us on Anchor.fm. There's a support button there you click on. I also have links to all this on my website's support page at www.catholicisminthecar.com.